Welcome to the January 25 clinic. Nice to see everybody again. Got some BNF 9s or F7s, can't really tell here, down by the old Kingdom. Um, as always, my name's Kevin. My co-host is Ken. And incidentally, just if you hadn't heard, we are not doing the in-person meetings anymore. The attendance just wasn't supporting that for the value of the facility, the costs and everything. So we're going to stick to virtual for now. Um, Anybody here joining us for the first time, or somebody new would like to introduce themselves? I recognize most of these names on here, if not all of them. Uh, okay. So news and announcements. I think. Now my screen. There we go. Oops. Okay. So some upcoming events this weekend down in Ridgefield, Great American Train Show. They're having back to back. I don't know if they did this last year. I thought they were a little more separated than they are, but it would make sense they'd be in the same area when it's so close together. But at Ridgefield, Saturday and Sunday this coming weekend. I believe it's at the Clark County Fairgrounds. And then, of course, the following weekend is the same show, but up here at the Puyallup Fairgrounds on the 18th and 19th. Greattrainshow.com is for more information there. And I think if you buy your tickets early, it's $1 discount if you buy them online, if that's worth it to you. Then Grays Harbor is having their fourth annual railroad swap meet out here in Elma on the 8th and 9th at the Grays Harbor County Fairgrounds. I haven't attended that so far, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to swing out there this year and check it out since it's fairly close, about 45 minutes from here. See what that's like. And then United Northwest Model Railroad Club Train Show and Marketplace, the big one out at the Monroe Fairgrounds, Evergreen State Fairgrounds, February 22nd and 23rd. It's always a big one. Lots of vendors, lots of layouts, lots of folks. The 2025 PNR convention, the Ainsworth Connector, is at the Red Lion Hotel and Conference Center in Pasco. May 9th and 11th, that's the regional convention for PNR. Registration is open. The link, I just got the title here. I didn't get the link, but I can copy this and paste it in the I'll do that later. I'll paste it in the chat if you guys are interested in getting that link. And then the national this year, station number 6, July 14th and 19th in Novi, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. The registration for that is open too. And you can find more information on that at nmra2025.com. And see. And for more events, check your 40pnr.com/events calendar. Anybody else have any announcements or?
Kevin,
Uh-huh.
Steve Shores, just a little petty thing
Okay.
regarding the Great American Train Show in Puyallup. The email that was sent to us is incorrect. You don't get any money off by buying your ticket online. In fact, it's the same price, and
Okay.
you get charged another fee of like 75 cents. No big deal, but
Okay.
um, I contacted Bill, and the email is incorrect. The website doesn't have that on there. They used to do that in the past, but
Right. Yeah.
but
Okay.
it's not, you know. So
Okay. All right. Well, the dollars in this day and age isn't really a big
it's
incentive to
it's
register early anyway. I just like
yeah,
walking
just
right through the line.
saves you from standing in line is about
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any announcements? Any other events coming up or?
Oh, I can be real petty if you want me to be. It's actually Novi, Michigan.
Novi, what
And
did I say? Novi?
yeah, everybody says
Okay.
Novi because it's some weird French word or something. Well, it's Novi, Michigan. I grew up in Detroit, and Novi, when I was a kid, which was back in the 60s, Novi was not a suburb of Detroit. It was way out in the sticks and all the cornfields.
Oh, so there's one of each, huh?
What do you mean?
There's a Novi and a no. Oh, it's not a suburb.
And it wasn't when I was a kid. It was way out in the boondocks.
Okay.
It
Well, I
was
looked
in the cornfields.
I looked on the website map, and it looked like it's a pretty suburban sprawl around the convention center that they're having it in. So
It is now.
yeah,
It wasn't in the 60s.
that sounds like a lot of places anymore. All right, so it's Novi. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add to the calendar events or any other announcements they want to make? All right. Well, then, anybody have any tips of the month? Any modeling breakthroughs you want to share with anybody, or new techniques that you're interested in? I'll mention one that Ken and I were talking about earlier before most of you got here is um, on YouTube. I'm sure most of you have probably already found him. Boomer Diorama is a YouTube channel, and the guy, I don't know, Ken, if was he a former like a studio modeler for exhibitions and theater or movie or something like that? But just a fantastic modeler and all kinds of new techniques for modeling scenery, especially, and well, for structures, just everything. He's just a wealth of information, and Ken and I were discussing earlier some of these techniques that he has for stuff like modeling water and modeling trees and
Who's
um
this Ken guy you're talking about?
or Kurt. I'm sorry. What did I keep saying, Ken? I'm sorry, Kurt. But anyway, yeah. Do you know his background? How I don't know that I know.
He's a jack of all trades. He did a lot of theater work, scenery. He's driven logging trucks. You know, he's just done everything, and he lives up. I think he's in Alberta. Um,
Okay.
No,
um,
he
I
just
thought he was
across
in
the
no,
he just across the border in British Columbia.
British Columbia.
that's
Yeah,
right,
that's right.
because he's doing his layout is not that far from where the Fraser goes into the Sound. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, if you haven't checked him out, that's somebody I would really recommend if you got some time to go into the rabbit hole that is YouTube. But he's just a wealth of information, everything from, like I said, trees to structures to scratch building with styrene to water, just everything. He's painting. It's amazing to watch him. I look forward to his videos. But anyway, uh, Kurt and I were talking about earlier, and it kind of just brought that up that I should probably share that with everybody else if you haven't checked him out, because he's fantastic. So
Kevin, I have a
Yeah, I'm going to
comment.
see how his water technique turns out.
yes.
Kevin,
Uh-huh.
Steve Shores again here.
Hi,
I'm
Steve.
working on a ON30, small portable layout, ON30, and it's got a Sonoran desert Mexican theme. I'm having fun with it. All the buildings are made out of pink foam, but you would never know it. I cut the walls real thin on my bandsaw. You can carve stone into them and adobe and all sorts of stuff. But I've got about 3 or 4 more buildings to build before I can start putting down ground foam. But something interesting that I found the other day that would work for larger scale, probably S on up, is for roofing material. I use the corn shucks that you use to make tamales out of, and buy them in the store. They're real crispy, when you buy them. So you soak them in water for 10 minutes or so, and they become soft. You can either cut them in strips or you can cut them in individual shingles or whatever. It's kind of tricky gluing them down. You have to put glue on them while they're wet, put glue on your roof, and then right before the glue dries, then you put them down so they stick. Because if not, they're not going to stick for a while, and you're going to end up having to hold them down. And you want to get them stuck down before they dry out, because then they start curling and stuff. But they make a
Huh.
really funky looking roof shingles. Mine's more of a grass shingle look, but tamale
I'll be done.
wrappers, yeah,
Huh. Well, that's interesting.
yeah.
Where did you come up with that? Was that just an
I just
idea?
was trying to think of something that would give me a grass roof look that I could get at Hobby Lobby or this or that. And I'm not buying modeling supplies for all of this. I'm using joint compound and pink foam, and I'm using all kinds of weird stuff. You'd never know it when you look at the stuff I've done, but I always come up with weird things like that.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's cool. That's it.
So
That's
I'm
interesting. I would have
excited.
never in a million years.
When you think about it, they're kind of ribbed.
Yeah, yeah, I can see it now
Yeah,
that you mentioned it.
and I suppose you could use, if you grow your own corn, you could do your own corn husks, but it
Right.
works for larger scales, and then you can paint it or chalk it or whatever you want to do to it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and fairly inexpensive.
oh yeah, I mean, you get a lot of it for not much money.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying it. The hobby's gotten expensive, especially with all the, you know, that's why I'm my ballast. I think I mentioned it last time we got together. I'm doing all my ballast and spine rock talus and river bottom rock and everything from a bag of paver sand, just sifting it to
Yeah,
different, and it just let it dry out real good, and it's working just fine, and not paying $8 for a little bag of Arizona rock and minerals that costs another $5-6 to ship, so.
yeah,
But
different.
okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, good tip. Thanks. That's interesting.
Um, I could share something. I guess it was a couple of springs ago. I gave a clinic um, on my little uh, study-sized train room where it coexists with an active study that's only about 11 feet square, but
Right.
it's mostly backdrop, not a lot of three-dimensional structure stuff. But that backdrop is actually painted on ram board, which is that dense cardboard material that contractors use to protect, finished floors and that sort of stuff. Well, the backdrop is all done, and I'm about ready to hang it, and I'm going to hang it like wallpaper using wheat paste. And so I'll maybe next month or the month after give you a report on how all that has worked. But it's
Yeah.
about 42 feet long and 26 inches high, and I projected scenery images because I'm modeling Natchez Valley area over there near Yakima. So it's different than around here, of course. It's more
Sure.
arid with some trees and orchards and that sort of stuff. So I projected it up there using an overhead projector. Yeah, after using some photographic stuff that I took, but it's all hand painted, using airbrush and the technique that many of you are familiar with that I use down at the History Museum, etc. But I'm pretty pleased with it, and so I'm looking forward to seeing it up and in place. It's a little bit of like wrestling with a monster. Luckily, my wife is willing to help me because it's being that long, and it's
Right.
moderately heavy because it's a dense cardboard material. But I rolled it out on my 12-foot long dining room table, and like a big scroll. If you think about the old scrolls, and that's how I did the detail painting, and so there's a bunch of structures painted on there, both near industrial structures and then town structures. Some businesses and lots of houses and trees and that sort of stuff. So anyway, looking forward to showing it to you all at some point in time.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing it. That's interesting. That's a medium that I hadn't thought about for. I know what you're talking about though. Yeah, I'm still using the hardboard. That's not
Well,
cheap either anymore.
what I really like about it is that you can radius in the corners,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and so and it's relatively easy to handle, and so anyway, it was an experiment that I think so far has turned out pretty well,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
All right. Interested to see it.
Speaking of cardboard, I gotta say this real quick.
Sure.
For corrugated roofing material for larger scales, I just take cardboard, wet it down, let it soak a little bit, and the glue releases. And you can pull one side of the cardboard up, and then all of a sudden you've got a corrugated roofing for larger scales. You obviously, it's indoor only, and you're going to coat it with glue or paint or whatever. It's very convincing. I've even used it for plowed fields, for the rows in a plowed field.
Oh,
where,
sure. Yeah.
where I just soak cardboard, and different cardboard reacts different. So you just play with it, but it's real cheap. And then another corrugated roofing material, some of you guys have probably even done it, is you get the disposable cooking tins at the grocery store, the thin aluminum, cut it to the size you need for your corrugated roofing, and then go around your workshop or your house and find a ladder that has ribs in the rungs of the ladder, a step ladder. And then you take a little toothpick or a pencil or whatever, and you just, press down with onto that those little pieces of aluminum, and all of a sudden you've got 3 foot by 8 foot sheets of corrugated roofing.
Just burnish it right into the
You burnish it
material.
right in, and just depends on. I've got a couple different size of grids on different ladders that I have, but I got that from YouTube. The guy just walked around the house and tried to find where he could find little ribs, and it works so well. It's so easy to do,
Huh.
and
Yeah,
very
cool.
cheap. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Unless you have to buy the ladder first.
right. But you've usually got ladders hanging
Yeah,
around.
yeah.
And
I know what you
yeah,
I know what you're talking about. I've got several ladders, and I did have the exact same thing. I'd never
Yeah.
thought of that.
yeah.
Cool. So that's another good one. Anybody else have anything else before we get into our clinic for the night?
Well, I remember when I was about 15 making aluminum for the side of some sort of structure that they would store grain in. Take a piece of masking tape, just pull a strip of masking tape off, stick it to aluminum foil. Then you can rip the aluminum foil. So now you've got this strip that's as wide as the masking tape is, and take a comb and run it on the aluminum foil. And you've got corrugated siding.
Huh.
And then you can use the masking tape to glue it to some other surface.
So is like the masking tape double-sided then, or
No, just
Okay.
single-sided masking tape.
okay?
So one side sticks to the aluminum foil, and then you just glue the other side to what you're,
Oh, okay.
you're
Gotcha.
building it of.
Gotcha. Huh. Okay. Yeah, I can see where that would probably work.
I
Huh.
found a good thing if you're ever doing railings or fencing or something, use go buy some 1/4 inch what they call hardware cloth at Lowe's or whatever, and you can cut the strips into like 2-run fencing. Works really, really, really well.
Yeah, I imagine, and you probably do the same thing for in scale. They have smaller pieces, smaller squares of that too.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's very, very strong since it's metal, basically.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Might have to do a little filing on it to get the sharp edges off after you cut a fencing, but it really works very
Right.
well.
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. Cool. All right. Any other good tip session this month? All right, Ron, if you're ready, we can make you a co-host and share your screen, and you can take over this meeting here.
Okay, I'm ready. I'll share my screen. And
Get to see
oh,
where are
wait a
you
minute.
at
Oh, here we
here?
go.
There you are. I'm gonna my computer's still a
Okay,
little. All right.
are we up and running now? It looks like tomorrow on my screen.
I see you. Yes.
Okay,
Everybody else see her on screen?
Yes.
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
okay. Well, I like to build structures, and my layout is 0 and 30. That's important because I use techniques that might not work so well, or they'd be harder to implement in smaller scales. But it's a modest size layout, 11 by 14. I have 61 structures so far, and about 85% are scratch built. The remainder are craftsman kit or kit bashed. Um, I recently completed a project that used a wide range of materials and techniques, and so I thought it would be an interesting clinic to describe, not as a step-by-step building project, but rather a source of suggestions and ideas that you might use with different materials and different techniques. Um, the building I'm going to describe tonight is a flat that fits in this industrial area of my layout up here where the oval occurs. It's a series of vertical scenic industrial buildings between two scenic dividers over here. Whoops, excuse me. Over here on the left and on the right are two scenic dividers. The space is roughly 8 feet long, I think, as I remember correctly. And these are a series of industrial buildings I've been working on to occupy that space and to conceal a bit of hidden trackage behind it, which happens to be also on about a 2% grade. This is the building, the general shape that I had mocked up for the building that I wanted to use in this space. I use a lot of mock-ups, and this is the final result, just a little preview of that final result. I chose gator foam for the co-structure. I use a lot of gator foam. I like it a lot. Most of you probably by now know about gator foam, but if you don't, it's like a foam core, but it has a 32-inch wood fiber veneer on the sides instead of paper. And the foam, I think, is more dense than ordinary foam cores. So it's quite rigid. It's light in weight, warp resistant. You can cut it with a knife or a saw, and so forth. I always use glue blocks because you're mostly gluing foam to this veneer, and that's not the best kind of joint. And I also recommend rabbet joints. They don't get around gluing the foam to foam, but they do make a nice joint. This is what a butt joint looks like, and a rabbet joint has this dado on the edge so that the pieces come together as shown here. I began by drawing the basics directly onto the gator foam parts. Usually I make a scale drawing using either CAD or just paper and pencil, but in this case, I just drew it out directly on the pieces, the main pieces of the gator foam. There are two portions to this building, and I kept them as separate sections for the first several stages of construction. They'll be joined later, as shown here. I used stripwood siding for the main structure, and for dealing with stripwood, I have almost universally use a three-step procedure. I apply texture using any of these, a variety of tools, and then I dirty the wood with either a mix of shoe dye and alcohol, or for the last few years, I've really been taken by these hunter line stains. and that's what I'm using now mostly. For example, here I use this cordovan brown 100-line stain. It's thinned 2/3 with alcohol. And then I treated some of the strip wood with a screwdriver, small screwdriver blade, to get a fairly coarse grain, and another half of approximately half of the strip wood siding was treated with this tool that I made by putting half dozen X-Acto number 11 blades into a wooden handle with epoxy and so forth. So it gives a little finer grain. And then the third step is to apply pan pastels. And I think by now all of you have probably at least heard of pan pastels, but they're a cake-like format. The color I'm using here is called bright yellow, green, extra dark. And these pan pastels are typically applied with sponges. This is my favorite shape. And this is a very handy palette that the Pan Pastel company manufactures that gives me a tray to store essentially all of the colors I use for my modeling. Many modelers use pan pastels mainly for weathering. I find them terrific for main coloration because I like the weathered or worn appearance that I obtain with them. I think maybe one of you actually did a clinic on using them for instead of paint. Regional 4D P&R meet a year or two ago. Some modelers use clear overspray. I don't. I haven't found it to be necessary. I don't know if they're still available, but Roger Malinowski did a DVD that was very good about using pan pastels. He was the owner of Stony Creek Designs and has been deceased for a year or two, so I'm not sure whether that DVD is available. You might try eBay. I think this technique of dirtying the wood and then painting it with pan pastels gives a nice board-to-board variation that I like. It looks like a worn appearance. I'll sponge this lightly with weathering colors later to make it a little more varied. The open spots here are places that will be later be covered with other parts. As a sidebar, I would say that I don't often use nail holes. I haven't had real good luck with them. They look great on some people's models, but frankly, they're way out of scale. A 6-penny galvanized box nail is a typical way of attaching wood siding, and the head diameter of such a nail is 1/4 of an inch, which in my scale, low scale, is only 5/thousandths of an inch. And that's about the thickness of a piece of printer paper. It's also 1/3 of the diameter of this number 80 bit. So it's 1/3 the diameter of the hole drilled by this 180 bit. So any nail holes that you see on a model are likely to be grossly exaggerated. Now I used scratch doors and windows for most of this model. The freight doors are pretty easy. I make a little jig of the size that I want the door to be, put in a backing of thin plywood, like 32nd inch plywood, cover it with pre-stained boards to get a board by board effect, and then add the frame, goes around the edges, the threshold at the bottom, and the trim, and then the stiles, rails, and cross braces, and got a door. The entry door is also pretty straightforward. I use a jig again, a backing of plywood, add color, frame it, and a threshold at the bottom, rails and stiles around the perimeter, added some trim also around the perimeter. Um, One tip is for knobs, I've found at Joann's Fabric, I found a thing called bridle lace pins. They have a much smaller head than ordinary straight pins, and they're much closer to a scale diameter. Actually, for O scale, they're almost perfect, about 2.5 to 3 inches, scale inches in diameter. I poke the pin through a piece of paper for a back plate and paint around that paper and then trim it with a very fine scissors. Because that little back plate is kind of hard to handle, but the pin allows me to center it where I want it and then push it down with a dab of glue behind it. I use dark rust brown for the color on the heads of the pins. Now, for windows, I made what for me was a brilliant discovery. I mean, for other people, it's probably pretty straightforward, but I realized when I was working on a kit at one point that the way they use laser cut parts suggested why not use strip wood, and the glazing can be structural. I mean, especially if the glazing is plastic in a model, I could glue pieces of strip wood to the glazing rather than gluing the glazing to some laser cut window image. And so I now make most of my windows with strip wood by gluing the strip wood to the glazing instead of gluing the glazing to laser cut parts. This is the way I did it in this particular case. I sized a piece of scrap to exactly the window opening, and then I made a jig with just some strip wood on plywood backing, and I used a plywood scrap that was half the length of the half the length of the window plus the width of the mouton to 30 thousandths in my case. So then the glazing is 10 thousandths Lexan. And I glued the strip wood to that glazing for the upper sash. Then I made a lower sash with similar parts around a piece of Lexan, but I included the Moonton, and then I glued these two pieces together by putting the lower sash for easy alignment back into the jig and glued the upper sash on top of it, aligning them at the middle. And then I glued in the bottom segment of the segment and trimmed the sash. Now, applying the external trim, I found to be kind of tricky to get. What I wanted was an equal split between the amount of exposed window frame, sash frame, and the backing flange that were on the frame so that it could be mounted into the hole. So I made a jig for this that looks like this. It's actually pictured here diagrammatically. It's just a piece of plywood with a chunk of wood and this block here where the thickness of X establishes the flange width of the trim. So then I put the flange into that slot with a bead of glue on the back of the sash, and then put the sash onto that flange or onto that trim, and then I come up with a picture like this. The flange, the trim is glued on with a flange of exactly the width I want, and exposing exactly the amount of frame that I want exposed. I do the same at the lower trim, and then I add top and bottom trim in place, fitting them mostly by eye, basically. And this is the finished window. These are just two tips for working if you decide you want to build some windows or doors. These might be useful. I use pressure sensitive adhesive, which I got from Micromark. I'm sure there are other things available, but it applies uh, white, and then it dries fairly quickly to clear. And once it's clear, it's tacky, but it won't squeeze out. So um, you can use it to apply glaze to any kind of window, or in this case, to glue the small frame pieces onto the glaze. And then for handling all of these small parts, the moutons and the various pieces of the windows, I just use a scrap business card with a piece of double edge tape on it to hold the little pieces that I'm working on. Then this project also involved a double window, so I used the same techniques, making a jig, then upper and lower sashes, completing the frame and finishing with trim. There were also horizontal casement windows, and here I used a drawing in the back of the jig to help me install the montons. So then I built the sash in that jig, then added the montons over the lines in the drawing, and these are the results. So these are the finished windows and doors in place on the project. Now, the loading dock across the front of the building under the freight door was the next project. And for this kind of thing, it's really nice, important, but nice to have all of the legs, which are very short, especially in a smaller scale, be the same length. And so I cut them to pretty good length, and then I did use this ultimation sander and repeater to shorten them up. I don't know if you're familiar with this tool or not, but if you don't have a disc sander, which I think is essential for getting pieces exactly the right length, this would be a tool for you to consider. So then I assembled the legs to the beams with this heavy square and a bunch of scrap masonite spacers. And then I also used masonite spacers to hold the leg assemblies in place while connecting them together with the connectors. And this is what that assembly looks like. Then I added the decking. Yeah, the posts support the beam of the upper level annex here. And these braces for the beam I made from a scrap of paper with nut bolt washer castings in it. Then on this second floor, I wanted to use shingle siding for the extension over this loading dock. I had previously cut window openings and added the floor and joists, and the spacers helped align the 2x12 floor joists over the 2x12 flooring. Here, I want to note that there's a difference between shingles and shakes. Most of us use these two terms interchangeably, but shakes are um, split from blocks of cinder, whereas shingles are sawn, and shingles are usually a little bit tapered, and shakes are much more roughly tapered. Shingles are used mostly for walls, and they give nice straight seams and so forth. But the roofs you might have seen in your neighborhood are mostly shakes, and they're fairly irregular. The lower edges especially are ragged. So I want to describe a method for working with individual shingles, but as shingles, not shakes. So I want straight lines. I found some thin sheets of cedar from Sierra scale models, but I think you could probably use woodworking veneer from woodworking store, or maybe drawer liner and so forth. And I previously cut some with my saw, but some of you probably wouldn't have a tool to do that. Anyway, I cut strips of various widths. I found that about 4 different widths is quite enough to make it look like you got a bunch of randomly wide shingles. And I taped an array of quote randomly selected widths to a flat surface with narrow strips of masking tape separated by the approximate length of shingles. Then I cut across these strips at the length of shingles. I made that fairly precise by using a strip of plywood scrap as a measuring device, push the straight edge up against this surface with the measure in between, and then sliced so that I get a bunch of strips of shingles of equal width. Now, I found that these strips can be about up to 2.5 inches wide. Beyond that, they're just too hard to manage. And so I glue these shingle strips then to the previously ruled model, and I remove the tape as I go. And so I get this kind of thing. These were the final, this was the final array of raw shingles. Here I applied 1 coat of creosote black stain with 2/3 alcohol, thin 2/3 with alcohol. Here I'm trying to change the cedar's basic redness to a kind of weathered look, and just stain doesn't quite do it. So I put on a heavy coat of Bragdon grimy gray chalk, just brushed on. And then I flooded that with a second coat of stain and scrubbed with paper towel while wet. And I got this appearance that I think is okay. The windows here, incidentally, are, despite my previous deviation to scratch building your own windows, these are Grant Line windows. I primed them with Rust-Oleum camouflage sand, and then sponged on some pan pastel and dry brushed with Americana acrylic. So this is the final result, and I'm pretty happy with it. This, by the way, is a helpful tool. Just 2 pieces of scrap wood I made that allow me to place them down over a row of shingles and pull off the tape, because otherwise, when you pull off the tape, the shingles get pulled off. So this method for dealing with individual shingles, but getting them all aligned like wood shingles is clever. I forgot if I don't know if I gave you the attribution to that or not. Yeah, I learned about it at a clinic. Oh, it was Todd Leftwich at the 2023 National Narrow Gauge Clinic. He came up with this technique, and he was promoting it not so much to make straight lines, but more to be efficient rather than working with individual shingles. I didn't find it to be, frankly, that much more efficient than individual shingles, but it did yield very uniform straight lines. One downside is that it also leaves many joints uncovered. You see where these say this row of shingles and this row of shingles, the joint is in the same place. That would not happen in real life. Otherwise, you'd have a leak between those shingles. But in the model world, that's not very noticeable, I have to admit. Now let's talk about lighting for a minute. Many of my models are lighted. When I first switched to LEDs from incandescents, I liked the Woodland Scenics Just Plug system. Some of you probably tried it. I was frustrated in early efforts with frequently recommended surface mount LEDs, but a clinic by Sam Swanson, who does a clinic at almost every convention I've ever attended anywhere, offered some very useful suggestions. He said to try the pre-wired surface mount LEDs, number 0402, if you're going to do this, and pre-wired is essential. Then 20 milliamp current limiters eliminate the fuss of trying to figure out what resistor to use with an LED. And then he also suggested that soldering pads were helpful. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. So I got some pre-wired 0402s on eBay and some 20 milliamp current limiters from Microlumina, and I wired them up with scraps of PC board ties as the soldering pads. And right away, this became my new standard for making lighting in my buildings. First of all, note that these surface mount LEDs are almost unbelievably small. If you've never worked with one, this is its size compared to a dime, and this is the kind of smallest micro 1.5 volt incandescent light that I had used in the past. So they're not only really tiny, but they're really bright. So I found a 10K potentiometer in series with a circuit was useful for adjusting the brightness. And I got, a pound of those 10K potentiometers from Amazon for a few dollars. The 7-inch wires on the pre-wired LEDs are also very small, about the thickness of a sheet of printer paper. So they're hard to handle and hard to solder. And these kind of chunks of PC board to solder to make it very helpful. So this is the basic circuit if you ever want to do this. Just a 12 volt DC supply through a 10K potentiometer, through a current limiter, through warm white LED, and back to the negative. You got to get all the polarities right. This is a DC circuit. And this was what it looks like in my actual implementation. For light fixtures, I used these engineering aluminum shades, and I just countersunk a hole in a piece of scrap wood to help drill the shade. put a vertical wire through that hole to help align a brass tube to keep it vertical, and applied epoxy to join them together, then painted them white on the inside and black on the outside. I also decided fairly late in the process that I wanted to light one window in the office area and one window in the extension that I had just put the shingles on. So to make that plausible, I built a little room around the window in the extension and filled it full of junk box stuff that looked like it might be related to some kind of industrial process. And in the office area, I also built a little cardstock room, and not much of it was going to be visible through the small window looking into the office. So I had a front seat out of an old German model car and a cuckoo clock that I had no idea where it came from. Anyway, all in the junk box. I didn't need any light fixtures in these two rooms. Instead, I just put the EUD through a piece of styrene tubing, and here's the one here. It's well out of the field of view, so it won't be seen in any case. So these are the three circuits. You wouldn't need to, but I did use a separate circuit for each of those three situations: the office light, the extension light, and the lights over the loading ramp, because I might want to have different brightnesses there. And I used Micromark connectors, these miniature connectors from Micromark, here like this, to so that the this part of the building would be removable from the scene, at least in the initial stages of construction. And then behind the scene, I had this terminal block from the 12-volt DC source and the female version of the connector. Notice I haven't had a chance to mention this before, but the front portion of this building is just flat, and it's positioned in the surrounding area so that the walls are not visible, but they still need to be there to support the front and connect to the roadbed behind of the hidden track behind. So these are kind of dummy walls. They're notched so that they accommodate the raised roadbed behind the building, but they won't be seen. Then I used rolled roofing on this upper extension that I've been talking about, and for that I used blue masking tape. I trimmed the plywood base to size, sprayed it flat black on the side and on the back side, excuse me. Stained it here on the front side with thinned cordovan brown and applied the first row of masking tape. Then I drew lines to provide spacing about 3 inches overlap for subsequent rows of masking tape. And then I applied the masking tape, painted it grimy black, and added a tear and a patch and a plumbing vent and some pan pastel weathering. And that's the final roof, except for the rafter tails. Now here's a jig I find very useful, and you might find it useful too if you have the ability to put it together. I use masonite. You don't have to use masonite, but I use masonite. So I've got on one layer masonite spacers, and on a recessed layer masonite backing. So then the roof base material pushes into that masonite backing, and the roof rafter tails then are spaced by these masonite spacers. So this is looking down on the top of this jig. This is looking on the back side of the jig. And this, I hope, in combination, these three views will give you a sense of how this jig works. So this finished roof slides in under the top layer with the masonite spacers, and then the pre-cut jig, pre-cut, excuse me, rafter tails are slid into these equally spaced slots to attach the rafter tails. And it works very, very slick, and I've always hated applying the rafter tails, but they're really a critical part of the scene, so I recommend that kind of thing. Then I want to talk about the annex that I was going to build, which I wanted to be brick. I've experimented with brick paper unsuccessfully. I didn't like it, didn't have enough surface density. This little pump shack I built with individual bricks, and that was a lot of fun, but it's pretty tedious, as you can imagine. So I tried a potentially more efficient method here. I took styrene strips, scribed them at brick lengths to represent vertical mortar lines, and then I spaced them with strips of thin styrene to present horizontal vertical lines. In my case, in O scale, 2 by 4 by 8 bricks would be basically 0.040 by 0.080 strips for the bricks, and then with the styrene scribed at 0.160 intervals, and they're separated by 10,000 strip styrene. So to glue these to the base, I first laminated a gator foam structure with 0.010 styrene. Then I was going to be doing a lot of scribing, and I wanted to be equally spaced, so I used a jig for this. I cut slots at the correct spacing using a piece of scrap wood with a styrene flange on it, so I could first cut a slot, then stick this piece of scrap wood in that slot, cut the next slot, so on down the line. It didn't take very long. Incidentally, I didn't know this before, but the wide X-Acto blade has razor saw blade has a wider kerf than the narrow X-Acto blade, and this slightly larger kerf is a little more satisfactory for this purpose. So then I made a jig for scribing the vertical mortar lines in the mortar strip. The jig is just two pieces of masonite again, because that's what I have on hand, separated by a spacer about the width of the styrene strips that were to be scribed. So it looks like this from the side view. And I put it in my pan of ice and went down through the slots with the razor saw to make the scribes. So I learned pretty quickly that this is still fairly tedious, but it is important, and you really need to keep things aligned to get this to work, and that's the tedious part. But I also discovered that after a dozen rows, I hope you can see here how irregular the surface looks. It's not flat, and all of these rows are supposedly of the same depth. So why isn't the surface flat? Well, I measured a bunch of styrene strips from 5 packages, 10 per package, and I found that they vary from 68 thousandths to 88 thousandths. They're supposed to be all 80 thousandths. So this variation of 20 thousandths is an inch in O scale. So the reason these don't look flat is because they vary in depth by 1 scale inch. That was surprising. Anyway, all of the packages had variation. The minimum was from 0.077 to 0.084. The thickness was fairly constant. At this time, I had put enough, I had invested enough in this that I decided to finish and see if it looked okay when I was done. So I added the remaining brick courses, leaving space for these concrete trim bars, and I sprayed it with a rattle can. Rust-Oleum claret wine is the color I like for bricks, for some bricks anyway. And then I applied a slurry of Durham's water putty and wiped it with a dry cloth and then buffed it with a damp cloth. I used this acid brush to apply the slurry. And I've been using Durham's water putty for brick mortar for many years, and I like it a lot. And then I stuck in the concrete trim and weathered with pan pastels. Overall, I was happy enough with this. The surface is slightly exaggerated, but not great enough to reject. And the whole process is a little bit faster than individual bricks, not quite as fussy, certainly preferable by most modelers to individual bricks. One way you could deal with the surface irregularity if it bothers you is you could set aside the outlying strips of styrene. My approach, I think, would be in the future, I'd probably just use wood strips. I cut my own strip wood, and so I can control the size, and I'd probably just use scribed wood strips instead of styrene. I have stained wood as brick, and it works fine. This building was going to have a concrete block foundation, so I used a similar approach with it to the bricks. I took 8x8 strip wood. Typical concrete blocks are 8x8 by 16. I took 8x8 strip wood, scribed it at 16-inch intervals, applied it to a piece of plywood for a foundation, and used thin wood spacers for horizontal mortar lines, mortared with Durhams and dirtied with pan pastels, and this is the result. It's ready for installation. Now I'm going to put a cedar shake roof on this thing. So remember the difference between shakes and shingles. These are typical prototype dimensions for cedar shakes. Typically they might be 18 inches long. The widths range from like 3 to 12 inches. And the overlap is usually 2/3 of 12 inches with a 6-inch reveal between subsequent rows. And so the angle for the first course of shingles is established by a couple of rows of horizontal rows of decreasing width. Here I got an idea for mass production from a clinic by Ray Persig. Actually, this is one of the virtual clinics at the convention, the NMRA convention that didn't happen in 2021. And so here I'm cutting strips from Sierra West cedar, and I cut those strips at 4 different nominal widths. Then here I wanted the shingles to be sorted by size, by width. So I arrayed the strips of a similar size on a self-adhesive paper, trimmed the edges, and then used an 1/8-inch scrap of plywood to measure the strips of shingles and cut with a scalpel. So I got a bunch of strips like this. and removing them from the backing strip, I got a whole pile of shingles, all sort of the same size. And I did the same thing for the shingles of 3 other widths. Then I applied these shingles individually along pre-drawn guidelines, choosing the sizes as randomly as I could, but being sure to cover the joints. And this insert shows what how the angle of the first row was established. And this was the final result after trimming, and you can see the nice shake-like irregularity. Here I used a little different staining technique. I stained first full strength with creosote black stain, which is much blacker than the cardamom brown stain that I've used before. Then I brushed it with pan pastel neutral gray shade and then flooded it with alcohol. Then after that was dry, I weathered with more pan pastels without the alcohol, and this was the result, and this is what the final building looks after I added rafter tails. Now, up until this point, this building has been in 2 segments. The left-hand side, where the brick annex would be attached and the chimney would go, and this part that we've essentially been working on so far. These segments were designed for a slight overlap, as shown up here, but it wouldn't have been a very strong joint. So I put in these blocks, precisely cut to size, glue blocks to help stabilize the joint, and then those in combination with a closely fitting roof segments will assure some kind of lateral rigidity. And then I used a tar roof on this building, and for tar roofs, I just do the following. I paint the roof substrate with heavy application of grimy black. And then I lay on ordinary Kleenex and I brush it over the top with grimy black. Then I use a fairly stiff brush to push out the worst wrinkles. It's inevitable there will be wrinkles. And then let it dry and trim it. And glue the segments in place. Here I'd, after patching, and I did add an additional coat of grimy black here with brush. And this is what the tar roof looked like. Then I had a very large brick chimney in mind. And for chimneys, I have developed a scheme for using for using stack of styrene chips. I've made several chimneys this way. This was the first one, which was a copy of a prototype chimney that I needed, a very specific size and so forth. For the current project, it's a freelance, but still same technique. Anyway, what I do is alternate 0.40 inch styrene strips for the brick courses with smaller 0.010 chips for the horizontal mortar lines. Now, 0.040 in my scale is 2 inches basically, and 0.010 is a ½ inch. So I scribe these chips then with vertical lines for mortar, and I put in the spacers and I stack them together, and I have a chimney. So these are like the brick slices and the mortar slices, and they're individually glued together and then scribed for the vertical mortar faces. The chimney for this project was fairly big. It had a face that was 6 bricks wide and sides 4 bricks deep. And it was going to be 10 inches tall. So there are four arrangements for vertical mortar lines. There's the face with half brick corners and the face with full brick corners, and the sides also with half brick corners and the full brick corners. So I should have made this drawing a little bit differently, but the face with full brick corners goes with the sides that are half brick corners and vice versa. And then I made a scribing guide again, a jig for 8-inch bricks. I carefully cut razor saw slots along the edge of this 1/4-inch masonite strip, and then I added stops to facilitate the cutting of mortar lines in the required patterns. So these stops are set up so that here I'm going to cut the mortar lines for a full brick corner of an 6 brick side, and here I'm going to cut half brick corners for that same side, and here I'm going to cut full brick corners for the shorter side, and here half brick corners for the shorter side. And so this here I'm in the process of cutting mortar lines with I use a single draw stroke of the razor saw, and that draw stroke yields nubs on the backside, and I just remove those with a sanding stick. I also made several trim segments oversized with bricks laid vertically. So what I did is I stacked four chips together, and then I made vertical scribes in strips of styrene to make the faces of those trim strips. So then I assembled the brick courses, and you need to do this carefully because they, for surprising reasons, seem to get out of alignment if you don't proceed with caution. Anyway, I used this heavy-duty square, keep them aligned, and here you can see I'm getting near the end, and here's a trim strip near the top. The chimney cap I made from 2 of those trim strips with a couple of rows of brick in between, and then some brick chips of diminishing size at the top. And then I painted it and mortared it the way I've described dealing with bricks before, and weathered it, and this is the final result. And then I needed a sign, so I glued 6-inch planks to a 64th-inch plywood base. But I used a printer spacer to between the pages to kind of emphasize the line between the planks, and printed a sign on my computer. Use whatever typeface you wish, and I glued it to the prepared board, trimmed it, cut it, and exaggerated the seams by running the screwdriver down these gaps. Then I colored it with pan pastels and added the trim. In this case, I used raw umber extra dark and bright yellow green extra dark. And this building was going to have a roof structure, which I did with a gator foam core. I used Stony Creek corrugated cardstock, but I've used basically the same technique on a lot of different corrugated materials, which is just to spray it with gray primer, dab on Bragdon chalks, and spray it with alcohol. Then brush it lightly to smear the stuff around a little bit, and these are the 2 results of the siding applied. I built the door in place with planks glued to the back wall, added the frame, threshold, bracing, doorknob, trim. And so here's the completed roof structure, panel with rolled roofing and masking tape, painted with Rust-Oleum dark gray primer. weathered lightly with pastels and trimmed with wood strips around the edges. The ductwork was from ITLA scale models kits. They have them in both HO and O scale. One or the other probably would fit most any scale. The roof vent was fabricated from styrene. Now, just a few little projects you might want to try for use around your industries. These are some wooden crates. I think that real wood makes a much more realistic wooden crate than either plaster or epoxy casting. But I just took a block of wood, applied wood strips to it. In this case, the larger one is a well-traveled crate, so I'd weathered the wood, and the smaller one is a newer crate. And these are I added some trim and a couple of labels, just a piece of scrap with some scribbles on it. Cable reels are another thing you see around almost everywhere. Here I glued up a blank for the reels themselves from 1x4s. I shaped the wheels around a large washer, and I made a core from dowel and covered it with 1x4s. And I used a pattern to locate some details. Put in nut bolt washer castings, and the bearing plate. I wasn't just a piece of paper with a pin used to center it and get it located correctly. I drilled it later, and these are the completed reels. Here on this one, I added some I think nylon fishing line to make it some windings on it. For pellets, I use a two-part jig. This idea actually came from a Sierra West kit, but I made my jig from styrene. These pegs keep the two parts aligned. So I insert 2x4 runners in the jig, attach the top to the jig, and then insert the 1x5 slats. Once they're done, I take it out of the jig, finish, put a few slats on the back, at least 3, and then the finished product is like this. I can make smaller pallets by using only portions of the jig. Next time I might make a bigger jig so I can make more variety of sizes. And I've always been kind of fascinated by sawhorses, and I had a particular visual image because I got imprinted on sawhorses when I was very young. My grandfather was a carpenter, and I wanted to replicate that particular style. That is, with a broad top surface, no lower shelf between the legs, and they were stackable. And so I made this multi-layered jig with scraps of plywood, where I can assemble the legs, and they're you can see roughly what they're like. And this is the basic assembly, and this is after trimming off the braces on the legs, and they look pretty much like what I remember my grandfather's sawhorses to look like. They are pretty fragile, and this is all kind of a tedious process. If you want to make some sawhorses, you might consider a design that's stronger. For example, this one here on the right uses a vertical 2x6 at the top and includes a shelf. So the whole, there's a bigger glue surface here, and the shelf obviously could add, the braces for the shelf would add strength. But, whatever. I just think sawhorses are kind of an interesting model. And then finally, ladders. Ladders appear everywhere on my layout, at least. And I have made this jig, which has turned out to be very useful for ladders. I use just 2x4s for both styles and rails, and that seems to make realistic looking ladders. Um, in the jig, by the way, these little holes here are so you can poke a small drill bit or a pin from the backside to lift the thing out of the jig so that you don't remove 3 or 4 of the stairs of the rails when you're taking it out of the jig, because they're fairly small glue surfaces. So anyway, here I've got the 2x4 rails, and I've put in some rough cut 2x4 styles, steps, and then I've taken it out of the jig. Here I've trimmed it, and this is just to point out you can use this jig for ladders of any size. This ladder on the coaling station was built with this jig, and it's probably about 15 inches tall. Okay, so this is the final result of the building that I've been working on. You can see now the roof structure installed, the chimney, the brick annex, the upper floor extension, loading dock, sign, windows, doors, and so forth. And this is a lighted version. And that concludes things. I'm hoping to present this clinic at the PNR meeting in Yakima in the spring. So if you have any suggestions or feedback, or I would appreciate any comments. It'd be very helpful. That's it. Thank you.
Very comprehensive build clinic, Ron. Very nicely done.
Yeah, yeah, very good. Very good. I'm a retired architect, and the way that you pronounce that word is Muntin.
Yes, I've looked at that, and yeah, it's
So,
an
so
ugly
you know,
word.
yeah, it's kind of a weird little word, but Muntin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that structure that you put on the roof, you would call that a mechanical penthouse, or sometimes they just call them dog houses on the roof there. So those are just terms that might ring with certain people. So, but yeah, very, very, very beautiful models and really cool techniques.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very labor intensive though.
Well, yeah, but that's what I do,
Yep, yep. It's
If
what
you're not
turns you
into,
on.
well, I hope there will be a few cute clues here for kit builders, but it's mostly oriented towards scratch building, that's for sure. Now I'm having trouble getting back to my Zoom screen. I can't see anything except my own screen. How do I do that? Does anybody?
Did you click your stop sharing button?
I don't think I did, and now I don't know if I can get back to it. Let's see.
Ron, what was useful for me really was the whole idea of making the windows of gluing the wood to the glazing. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'm surprised at how long it took me to figure that out.
Yeah.
But, I had actually gave a clinic a couple of times on building windows, double hung windows like those from styrene, because I couldn't figure out how to do it with wood, because the glue joints would be so small that the wood wouldn't really work.
Well, you'd have to wait
I much
so
prefer
long
working with wood.
You'd have to wait so long for it to dry, and then they're so fragile.
Yeah.
So just glue it down to the glazing. That is great. And were you using super glue or wood glue, or using?
No, I use the PSA, the pressure sensitive adhesive, because there's no squeeze out.
And that's different than the removable glue that they also sell.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't think it has very much strength, but it's not really removable either.
Because they have another one that comes in the same color of tube. And for like putting people down on a deck or something, you can remove that person and relocate them elsewhere.
I have some of that from a totally different vendor, and I've never used it, but it seemed like a good idea.
It works really well too. Yeah, but that's great.
For most all of my working with wood, except for this glazing issue, I use Aleene's tacky glue. It stays flexible. If you make a mistake, you can remove it sometimes without very much damage.
Yeah.
And it dries fast. I
It
just think
doesn't
it's
absorb into
fantastic.
the grain of the wood very much, does it?
Yeah. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Any other questions or comments for Ron?
I hope you noted my email address. If anybody has any after the fact suggestions or confidential suggestions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
You got to have some of those single hung windows partially opened.
Yes, I know, and I'm going to do that on another model.
Yeah.
So Ron, where'd you get the gator board?
I get mine from Micromark, and it comes in sheets that are about 15 by 18 or something like that. But you can buy it in 4 by 8 sheets at let's see, what's the big art supply store? The online place.
Blick?
Yeah, Plex has it, I think, and there are other internet sources, but the size and convenience of the Micromark thing is good. It comes in at least one other color, white too, but I really like the black.
Isn't there an art supply store in Tacoma similar to Blick?
There probably is.
I've seen
I
it
don't live in
online.
Tacoma, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But there is a Blix in Seattle, I know, and
Yeah.
there probably is one in Tacoma. And I suspect there are quite a few sources. You could look at the Gator Foam website and maybe get some other sources actually. But
Yeah, we could check Michael's probably or Artco if Artco's still around, but
Hobby Lobby.
Michael's.
yeah, I haven't seen any at either Hobby Lobby or Michael's, but
Okay.
I really
Saw where Hobby
I didn't
Lobby
go there
has a
looking for it
black
either.
foam core. I mean, it has a black foam core, but it's not the Gator board. It's just a black version of the foam core.
Yeah, that I think you need to be careful of. I did see some of that at Hobby Lobby, and it looks pretty much the same, but I don't think it's nearly as sturdy.
It
No,
warps.
it's much like foam core, right?
I would say one thing about working with foam core, I have sometimes left the back layer of veneer in place so that I didn't have to black out a window or something, but I'm finding that it's easier to get exactly the size window opening I want by just cutting it through the whole thing and then covering the back with black construction paper or something.
So the only Blick art materials store is at Capitol Hill in Seattle. So there's nothing.
Is it?
That's
Yeah.
the closest one. I live in Gig Harbor, and this is one that's saying it's the closest to me.
Okay. Well, you probably don't want a 4 by 8 sheet of the stuff anyway.
A little awkward to handle.
Unless you're just starting out and you got a lot of building to do.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you
Yes,
very much.
very nicely
Okay.
done, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, unless we have any other topics anybody wants to bring up to discuss, I think that'll conclude the meeting. Share my screen. And let me know if you guys see this.
Right now it's blank. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
there.
I see it.
Okay.
I see it. Mhm.
All right.
There
All
you go.
right.